Hello and welcome to Runkle of the Bailey. My name is Ian Runkle. I'm a Canadian criminal defense and firearms lawyer. Fairly frequently, people send me links to cool stuff that other Canadians are doing on YouTube. And this might be neat inventions, or this might be things that they're doing that seem like they're a lot of fun. Now, the question people ask me is what they're doing legal, or are they committing some sort of crime or other offense in the process? And the answer is almost always that they're committing some sort of crime or offense. And so I don't make those videos because I have a fair number of police who watch my channel, and I don't want to point to this other person who's doing something that doesn't hurt anybody. None of these people are out like robbing banks or anything like that. They're just kind of playing around and engaging in intellectual curiosity and trying to entertain the public. But I don't want to be the reason why one of these people potentially ends up facing charges. Now, an exception to that is if somebody has already been charged. And so that brings us to the case of Gregory Ovens and Zachary Fowler. Now, these two individuals have both been charged with various parks offenses as a result of a video series that they did, which is a 30-day wilderness survival challenge. And they did that here in the Canadian Rockies, so both in British Columbia and in Alberta. As a result of this, they're facing a number of charges, which I'll go through. But first, I'll just comment on one thing that they say as a description of what they're planning on doing. So let's have a look at what they said about what their goals were.
I'm Zachary Fowler.
And I'm Greg Ovens.
And this is the 30-day survival challenge, Canadian Rockies. There's only one rule. If you want to eat, you gotta catch and cook it.
Now, I have to say, when I first saw these videos, it was after the news had been broken that they'd been charged with a bunch of parks offenses. And so I got real concerned by this statement because the thing I was worried about is that they might have been doing this wilderness survival challenge as though it was an actual survival situation. And in a real survival situation, the rules are a little bit different. And that's because of something called the Doctrine of Necessity. Necessity says that you may be able to break a law, something that would otherwise restrict you, because it's necessary to do so in order to save your life or the life of someone else, or to prevent some sort of serious injury to yourself or someone else. So as an example, let's say you're driving down a lonely road in the middle of nowhere and you crash your car. You're now injured and potentially in a life-threatening situation. And let's say your cell phone gets destroyed in this crash. But you can see there's a house nearby and it's the only house for literally, hundreds of kilometers. So you stagger up to this house, you knock on the door, you're seeking help. You're saying, I'm bleeding. I really need, I need help. But it turns out there's no one home. So at that point, you might say, well, there's no one home, but I need a phone really badly. I have to be able to call for help. And so you break in, you just, you're not there, you're not stealing their valuables or anything. You just break in and go to a phone and you call for, 911 to say, I'm bleeding to death. I need help. That might be justifiable under necessity. It's kind of like a self-defense principle, but for non-violent actions. Self-defense is somebody's coming after you with a knife or whatever else, and you have to use force to protect your own safety. Whereas necessity, the house isn't attacking you. It's not doing anything like that, but it's still necessary. We put your life above that house, that break and enter, that minor property, damage. You might still say, well, you shouldn't have broken in, but if there's no other option, we understand. And hopefully the homeowner would understand as well that it's, this is a higher priority. So a lot of the parks rules and hunting rules and so forth might kind of fall by the wayside in a real survival situation. If you have somehow landed in the middle of nowhere and you have access to nothing, it might be permissible, for instance, to hunt an endangered or protected bird. Now, don't take this as legal advice, and the practical advice is try not to be in that kind of situation. But the courts would ultimately have to decide this. But if it's really life or death, that's the kind of thing that necessity might permit. But you can't do that just because you're pretending at necessity. You can't do that just because you're saying, I'm doing a survival challenge. It's got to be a real survival situation. And in terms of assessing, whether these guys are in a real survival situation, when they say there's only one rule, they really mean on themselves, because they're bringing probably thousands of dollars worth of equipment. They got hammocks, they got fishing rods, they got all this gear. Their truck is right there. I mean, they're basically truck camping. And so there's no real survival issue. What they're simulating is not really wilderness survival. It's more, we went truck camping and we forgot to buy groceries. And can we get by without doing a shop? Because we really don't want to leave the campsite. So not exactly a wilderness survival situation. Now, I will say, that was my first real concern watching this, and that turned out to be unfounded because there are several places in the video where they go through and they say, you know, there's one spot where one guy identifies grouse and says, oh, I would love to hunt those grouse, except they're not in season, so grouse, you're safe. So it doesn't look like they were trying to go out there and be poachers. They're not out there trying to cause trouble. What instead seems to have happened is that they've run afoul of the fact that our laws are incredibly complicated and incredibly difficult to navigate. And this actually illustrates a bit of a danger that I will sort of talk about a little later in this video. First, though, I want to go through the information. Now, I only have the information against Mr. Ovens. With respect to Mr. Fowler, I haven't been able to get that yet. I suspect that's because Mr. Fowler is still at warrant. They've issued a warrant for his arrest, but he's in the States. So unless he decides to come to Canada and answer the warrant, they're probably not going to extradite him over some parks offenses. I don't think that they could extradite him over the parks offenses. So we'll have a look at the information and the charges that Mr. Ovens is facing. My understanding is that Mr. Fowler is facing the same charges plus one additional charge. And that extra charge is a charge of operating a drone without a permit. So let's have a look here. Now, I'll just note I have redacted a bunch of things off this information because I don't see a reason to put them out there. The first thing here is the name of the park warden. They're just whoever, like, this person might not have really had much involvement in the investigation. It's just the person who swore the information. I've left their badge number there, but, you know, don't try to track this person down and harass them. It's probably just that they got the task of going and swearing a bunch of informations on that particular day. So yeah, don't try to harass anyone after watching this video, please. I also redacted Mr. Ovens' birth date and his home address because I don't see much reason to put those in this video here. But let's go through the counts, and I'm going to sort of cut through because these guys filmed a lot of video. And so we'll get to see sort of what's going on as we go through these. So count one, on or between the first day of July 2019 and the first day of August 2019, so 30-day survival challenge, at or near Banff, within Banff National Park of Canada in the province of Alberta. So that's just setting down the jurisdiction where this is applying. Did unlawfully use natural bait, to wit, worms, in any park waters set out in an item of Schedule 7, contrary to Section 24 sub 4 of the National Parks of Canada fishing regulations, thereby committing an offence under Section 24 sub 2 of the Canada National Parks Act. So essentially, they're saying he used worms in a place where you're not allowed to use worms. Okay, did he do that?
I don't think we've caught anything in here without a worm. Or almost this entire time.
So, fishing this morning, and then work on the shelter for the afternoon. That worm from yesterday is still alive on here. That's weird. Come on, first cast. First cast, come on.
Do you think the Crown's got a pretty good case on count one? I do. I included that bit where you can see the mountain in the background because that is a very distinctive mountain and it establishes that this is taking place in Banff, Alberta. That's actually Mount Lehman. So the other thing is we can see them saying, hey, we're fishing with worms. So it looks like they've made the Crown's job very easy for them here. Count one seems to be pretty well wrapped up with a nice, neat little bow. The other thing I'm going to say, and I'll just throw it in here, is that I'm only going to be talking about the offenses for which these two guys have been charged. If you see other offenses, and I'm not saying if I do or I don't, but please don't leave those in the comments. Please leave that out. I will be monitoring the comments because I'm not trying to get anyone in any trouble for anything else. So yeah, just saying. All right, let's have a look at count 2 here. And I'm not going to read the full count again. The on or about stuff we can skip over. But this is fishing with a set line, contrary to Section 15 sub 1 of the National Parks of Canada fishing regulations. So, did they fish with a set line? Let's have a look.
I have to start catching more fish. So I'm going to make a couple set line traps and show you how they work.
Criminal defense lawyers have a word we use for this kind of moment where your client's caught on video admitting the offense, and that word is fuck. Yeah, count 2 seems pretty strong. He comes right out and says set line. That's going to be a problem. All right, let's have a look at count 3. And again, count 3 is wordy. I'm not going to go through the full legal language here, but it's keeping more than 0 fish in a lake that is limited to 0 fish. So essentially, this is a catch and release lake, Lehman Lake, and they're saying you caught and kept fish from there. So let's have a look. Did they keep any of those fish?
Not a bad fish.
No, it's decent.
That's a good size. That's one I'd like to eat for one fish for a meal.
Well, yeah.
You know?
But they're all basically that big or bigger, so
Yeah.
in here. We haven't caught any small ones.
No.
Pretty sure they kept that one, or at least the video makes it clear that it's past catch and release. So let's have a look at the next count here. So this one is an unlawfully hunting, disturbing, holding in captivity, or destroying any wildlife contrary to Section 4 sub 1 of the National Parks of Canada wildlife regulations. So hunting or disturbing wildlife, you don't even have to necessarily successfully hunt anything, but just trying to bother wildlife is enough to make this one out. Let's have a look. Yep, that'll do it. That's enough. Now, I used this clip instead of some others because this one was very convenient. It was part of another video that I was already cutting clips out of, and it also tells me that this was in the Lehman Lake area, so still within the jurisdiction and not in British Columbia, say. All right, let's have a look at the next count, count 5. So this one is, did unlawfully start or maintain a fire in a park other than in a fireplace provided by the superintendent, contrary to Section 4 sub 1 sub B of the National Parks of Canada fire protection regulations. Now, there's a little bit of a quirk to this one. I don't think it's going to matter in terms of like providing a legal defense or anything like that. It's just kind of an oddity, so I thought I'd mention it. So let's have a look at these regulations here. So 4 sub 1, no person shall start or maintain any fire in a park except, and then they have in a fireplace on private property, A, B, in a fireplace provided by the superintendent, C, in a portable stove, hibachi, or barbecue, or D, when in possession of a permit issued under subsection 3. So this is an or. Properly, they probably should have charged this as in violation of subsection 4, but they charged, or they specified 4 sub 1 sub B. I don't think that's actually going to be a problem in terms of them wanting to proceed with these charges, but it's just a little quirk that I noticed when I was going through all of this. All right, so I guess let's see if they started a fire outside of a fireplace or fire pit provided by the superintendent. You already know where this one's going, right?
There we go.
In case you're not familiar, the fireplaces that are used throughout Alberta are these big metal ring things. And I don't know, maybe my eyes aren't all that great, but I didn't see one in this video. There's plenty of other videos of them starting fires in little circles of rocks and so forth. And yeah, so unless there's a permit out there, it looks like the Crown's case on this charge as well is pretty solid. It seems to be well documented in all of these videos. All right, let's have a look at count 6. So this is, once again, I'm going to skip over all the legalese, but it's did unlawfully remove, deface, damage, or destroy any flora, so plants, trees, that kind of thing, or natural objects in a park without a permit contrary to Section 10. So I don't know when they would issue a permit to do that, but Let's have a look and see, was there any destruction of plants or trees or other natural objects? In case you're wondering what they're doing here, they've been cutting down trees in order to build a literal tree fort. And by the time they're done, they end up with multiple platforms. It's got a drawbridge. It's real fancy. So they say that the reason why they're doing this is because they're afraid of bears and they want to get up off the ground. Well, y'all know bears climb trees, right? You survival experts know that bears climb trees? Yes? I feel like it's okay to just say, hey, you know what? Tree forts are cool and we wanted to build one. And so that's what we're up to. But you can't do that in a national park. There are rules, and that's to make sure that the park is in a pristine state, that we're not going to to these national parks to see a collection of tree forts built by influencers. So yeah, that's what's going on here. But again, there's plenty of video evidence on this one. Now, the last charge is one that is just Mr. Fowler's been charged with that, and that is operating a drone in a national park without a permit. And to get a permit, well, they don't offer them for, I'm making a YouTube video. They're used for policing functions, for firefighting functions, that kind of thing. But you can't say, hey, we're doing some challenge in the woods and get a permit. So I guess the last question on this one is, do we see them operating a drone in this video? That's definitely drone footage, and if you watch the intro to Mr. Fowler's videos, you can see him with the drone controller in his hands. I'm not sure whether that intro video was filmed on the BC side or the Alberta side. However, that little bit of video that I just showed you is Alberta side. So it seems likely they're going to be able to make out that charge as well, although again, only Mr. Fowler is charged with that one. This illustrates a pitfall that people sometimes fall into, which is that it's actually dangerous to film yourself or photograph yourself enjoying the Canadian outdoors. And I know that sounds a little paranoid, but I've seen a number of cases brought where people have filmed themselves hunting or camping or that sort of thing, and they end up facing charges after it somehow comes to the attention of the authorities. And that ranges in terms of whether we're talking, sometimes it's really serious, really egregious, poaching behaviors, sometimes some really disgusting stuff, or it might be on the much more innocent level where somebody has screwed up and didn't really mean to do so. This is closer to the innocent screw up side, although it's not all the way there. I don't want to forgive any of this because, for instance, when we think about cutting down trees to build tree forts, you want to go into the forest to see trees and nature, not a bunch of influencer tree forts. And if everyone was doing that stuff, you wouldn't have much parkland left in sort of an intact state. So that one is maybe not so innocent, but again, it's closer to the innocent screw up level. Lots of people have run into this kind of trouble because Fish and Wildlife actually has a lot of resources to investigate this sort of thing. Now, Mr. Ovens has given an interview to the CBC, which is not usually something that is advisable. It's usually a really bad idea to talk to the media about an ongoing court case. And in fact, Parks Canada was asked for an interview and they said, listen, we're not doing that. This is an ongoing court matter. Mr. Ovens, on the other hand, gave an interview. And one of the things he indicated is, he said, and I'll just quote him here, he said, we're not denying that we were there doing these things. I mean, it's obvious in the videos, but it's just a principle that they don't do anything to let the public know when they change the rules. So that admission, I would normally say, is really terribly damaging, except that he's right. It's already out there on video, so he's probably not making things any worse with that admission. What he's talking about in terms of the rules changes is that apparently those lakes used to be lakes where you could go and catch fish and keep them. But they changed that at some point to catch and release because of concerns over whirling disease. So this is a conservation/protection measure. So that's what happened. He didn't know that that had been changed, and so that's why he's getting into that kind of trouble. Now, ultimately, that's not a great defense. He's indicated that he wants to use this argument to fight the charges, but that's an argument of mistake of law. And the courts will not recognize a mistake of law argument except in some very narrow circumstances that don't really appear to apply here. So it might help him in terms of sentencing, in terms of the courts deciding how badly to punish them, but it's not gonna, I can't see it helping him in terms of defeating the charges in the first place. Now, I will note here that I started out and I really expected to dislike these guys. I really expected that this would be a video just slamming these guys. Because when I hear that these guys are filming themselves committing all sorts of, these kinds of natural wildlife, fish and wildlife violations, I was picturing more of the kind of ugliest kind of poaching. But it's clear from watching these videos, these guys do care about what's going on. They're just not really up on the rules, and they ought to have been. It's unfortunate. And so I do have some sympathy, and as much as these videos are not really a survival challenge, I mean, it's a 30-day, can you survive in the woods for 30 days with saws and axes and knives and hammocks and several corporate sponsors and a shotgun and a drone and fancy soap. I mean, they got everything short of a guy to put a mint on their pillow every morning. And they've got a truck there. If you're in a survival situation and you've got a working truck that you can just drive out, you can win that survival challenge by just getting in your truck and driving home. So it's not really a survival challenge, but they do show us several things in that are really neat and some really interesting kind of woodcraft and things that would be really useful if you were in an actual survival situation, but which you just can't do otherwise, except possibly as a demonstration, without actually trying to catch any animals with it. So, which raises the question of how do you learn those sorts of skills to survive in the woods if you had to, without ever being able to practice it? But I don't think the government worries too much about that. All of this is kind of contrasted by another story that is actually just in the news, and that is Bear Henry and his family surviving for 2 months in the remote BC wilderness after their vehicle went off the road and they were stranded, and so they got stuck there. And so, that's somebody going through an actual survival challenge, and I would actually love to hear from those guys about or more from those guys. They've given some interviews, but just about their experiences and maybe to compare and contrast, because I suspect that most people who end up in survival situations don't have the luxury of all of those bits of equipment and so forth. They're much more things are much more desperate and much more dire. But as I said, I mean, I enjoyed watching the videos. I thought that they were useful in terms of things that they taught me. And I didn't, I actually kind of like the people in them as much as, I thought, hey, these would be fun guys to go and get a beer with. I kind of suspect that they're not going to be inclined, given that, some of my previous comments in this video, but I don't think these are bad people. They're just people who got caught up in our legal machine and who maybe should have read the rules a little bit better. And yeah, so again, the real takeaway message on this, I think, is be careful what you film yourself doing. This YouTube game here is kind of dangerous. It's kind of risky. Sometimes I do things with, testing stuff out, and I'm always really careful to think about what the legalities are and think about the possibility of, could I get in trouble doing this? And I mean, even though I'm a lawyer, I don't consider myself 100% safe when I'm making these videos. I think that there is a possibility that somebody, that I screw something up and end up in trouble. So that is something to really consider in terms of your risk assessment and how you manage your life. I'm not your lawyer. I'm an internet lawyer. I'm talking, but I'm not able to give you legal advice. but it's useful to think about these kinds of things when you decide what risks you do and don't want to take. And you should understand that posting this kind of stuff to YouTube and other platforms is an inherently risky activity, or at least not risk-free. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope you found this to be interesting and educational. As I said, it's kind of a sad case, and we'll see what comes of it. If there's any new developments in it, and there are some possibilities in that direction, I will follow up and see sort of what comes of it. But thank you for watching. Please like this video, share it with your friends, subscribe to see more content. I also want to thank my supporters on Patreon and Locals. At the $50 level, Jonathan Wheeler, Canada's National Firearms Association, Mike, Kyle Martin, the CCFR, and the Canadian Shooting Sports Association. At the $30 level, Sights and Arms Limited and Marc-Olivier Damour. And at the $20 level, Peter Hilger, Mark Whittington, Jane Babe and Luxor, Haywire, Dale Nesbitt, Cameron Johnson, Bruno R., Andrew Elsich, and Aaron Delso. Thank you as well to the $10 supporters who will be in the crawl immediately following. Thank you as well, to all of my supporters. And yeah, this is a complicated scenario or a complicated story. And I think it also kind of illustrates that there are few stories out there where you've got sort of a clear villain. Most stories are more complicated than it initially seems. People have more depth to them than is usually reported in the news stories. And I kind of came out of this with a different opinion than I expected to end up with. Anyway, thank you for watching. I hope this has armed you with knowledge.